So you may think that America is divided today, that America couldn't get any worse. But I can tell you a story that would make modern America look like Disney World. This story about America has it all. It's got betrayal, murder, guys getting their hands cut off, people getting beat with a cane, right? And it all takes place in the most evil, horrible, bloody place in the United States, Kansas. If you don't know anything about Kansas, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. It's just corn, pretty much. Kansas is really big. It's full of basically nothing, all right? Probably like 1,000 miles from a beach, hundreds of miles from a mountain, right? It's just basically like a whole lot of corn. So why was this now boring, flat, and useless state once such a hot commodity that hundreds died just to call it home? Well, I'm going to tell you. But first you gotta know that the United States is basically in like a bad relationship, all right? So we've all been there. One person in a relationship is way more into it than the other. One person plans all the dates. They're always cheating on each other. They can't stop fighting. They break up every other day. And you watch these couples and you're like, at some point you just gotta break up, you know? So in America, we have a relationship between the North and the South, right? The North and the South are in a relationship, and just like the fake couple I just talked about, they secretly kind of hate each other. They claim to be in a relationship, like the North has the South's initials in its Instagram bio, you know, with a heart or some nonsense. But just like two people in a bad relationship, they're always just trying to make it work. But they're just two completely different people. Like, it doesn't really work out. And they have a really, really big problem in their relationship, and that problem is slavery. The South likes slavery, and the North doesn't. So, the North and the South try their hardest to convince each other that the relationship is working out, right? They're like, this is working, isn't it? We like each other, and you know, yeah, you're great, you know, except for the slavery. But other than that, like, we're great. So they make these like little deals with each other. And one of those deals is the Missouri Compromise. And they say, okay, well, we're gonna draw a line. And above this line, all the states will be free. And below this line, they'll all be slave states, okay? And for a brief moment, this made the North and South happy. But it didn't fix the problem. And if we don't fix the problem, then it's just gonna come back around. So after that, the country gets a new state, California. Welcome to America, California. We're so happy to have you. And this guy from the North named David Wilmot is really, really, really excited about this. And he's like, hey, I don't like slavery. The North doesn't like slavery. I'm gonna make something called the Wilmot Proviso, where California, and you know what? While we're at it, Utah and New Mexico, completely free, banned from slavery forever, right? And the South's like, what did you just say? Like, did you not realize I'm standing here when you just said that? I love slavery. Why won't you let California be a slave state, okay? The South gets so mad at the Wilmot Proviso that they threaten to break up with the North, which is an action called seceding. The South basically says, like, I'm done with you if you don't fix this Wilmot Proviso stuff, okay? So, they have this big fight, and instead of just breaking up, they make another compromise. They make the Compromise of 1850. It does a lot of things, but, you know, two big things that it does is it makes California a free state. Cool. It lets Utah and New Mexico vote on whether or not they want to be a slave state or not, something called popular sovereignty. And it also enforces something called the Fugitive Slave Act, which meant if you were a slave in the South and you ran up into the North, it was illegal to harbor that slave. You had to turn him in. If you didn't turn that slave in, it would be, you know, you'd be fined by the government. You go to federal prison. And so the South was like, I like that prison part. Like, that's a good part. So we're okay with this. So the Compromise of 1850, it calms tension for the most part, but the North and the South are on their way to a very intense breakup. All right, let's get back to Kansas. We gotta set the stage. Before I set the stage, we gotta meet a new character named Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas is a senator, and he's from Illinois, and he's a big player in getting the Compromise of 1850 passed. And Stephen Douglas thinks he's like the best politician ever. He's like, I'm going to save America. Like, I'm gonna be the president. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna save America. And he was this big, tall politician. Just kidding, he was like 5'4". Anyway, Stephen Douglas says, you know what? This country's messed up, but I can fix it. So he pushes this idea of popular sovereignty, where the new states that come into the Union are able to vote on whether or not they are a slave state or a free state. At the same time, Stephen Douglas is like, the Nebraska territory, which is right here, okay, it's kind of gross, and it's sloppy, and I don't want it anymore. I want to make it nice and pretty. I want popular sovereignty, and I want to fix this. And he's like, ding, I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'm so smart. Everyone loves Stephen Douglas. Stephen. Steven. What he proposes is the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is a sweet little innocent law, and it does three things. It splits the Nebraska territory into two different territories, Kansas and Nebraska. Now, basically corn. It repeals the Missouri Compromise, okay, because it's stupid anyway. Get the Missouri Compromise out of here, it's stupid. And it establishes popular sovereignty for Kansas and Nebraska. Douglas is like, this is such a great idea, no one can be mad at this, I'm Stephen Douglas, I'm so smart, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to be so great. Gosh, I fixed America. Stephen Douglas, you did not fix America. See, the North and the South, they both want to win. The South wants more slave states because that means they get more votes. The North wants more free states because then they get more votes. It's all about how many states you have, okay? The North and the South were both just trying to get more people on their side so that they could win the relationship. Does that make sense? Now, Stephen Douglas, in his infinite wisdom, has created this new territory, and he's saying, oh, well, once enough people get there, they'll be able to vote on whether they can be a free state or a slave state. So the North and the South hear this, and they're basically thinking, oh, so if we put a bunch of Southern people in Kansas, enough to make it so that when they become a state we can vote, then it could be another slave state. And the North is like, you're telling me if we put enough Northerners in Kansas, enough so that when we vote to be a slave state or a free state, we can get another free state? So the North and the South both send like thousands of people. Kansas, which is this horrible state with absolutely nothing in it, was being flocked to by thousands of people from all over the North and the South. Kansas went from like nothing to in 1 year it had enough people to where it could decide whether or not it wanted to be a state, right? So everybody in the state would come through and they'd vote whether free or slave, right? Now this is where things get interesting. When it came time to vote, a bunch of pro-slavery guys from Missouri just waited on the border of Missouri and Kansas, came into Kansas on voting day with a bunch of guns, and they voted illegally. And this group of people is called the Border Ruffians. I just think that's a pretty funny name. So, the South wins and Kansas enters the Union as a slave state. And this makes everyone so mad. Tensions are just so high. The North and the South are ready to just beat the crap out of each other. So now the South basically has Kansas, and instead of taking their time, they throw together this quick state government and they make these absolutely insane laws that keep these anti-slavery Northerners out of Kansas. I don't want no Yankee touching my corn. So violence quickly breaks out, okay? There's a group of anti-slavery people that live in a town in Kansas, and that town is called Lawrence. And the new pro-slavery Kansas government said that everyone in the town was a traitor and should be arrested. The actual government said this in a grand jury trial, okay? They send 800 armed men into Lawrence. They burn down the headquarters. They destroy 2 newspapers printing presses. And then they go and like loot a bunch of the homes and the stores. So these pro-slavery people just kicked in. The government said, yeah, it's fine. Just go kick them in and kick them out, right? And this was called the Sack of Lawrence. And meanwhile, Stephen Douglas is like, gosh, this was a great idea. Like, I'm the best. Don't you guys think I'm the best? So John Brown hears about the Sack of Lawrence, and he gets really mad. See, you need to learn about this guy named John Brown. John Brown's like crazy. John Brown hates slavery. I cannot stress enough how much this guy really hates slavery. He believes that God sent him to earth just to end slavery. So he hears about the Sack of Lawrence. He hears about this attack on these anti-slavery people in Kansas who were just minding their own business, and he gets like furious. He wants to do something about it. Now, a little side note is that John Brown thought that 5 people died in the Sack of Lawrence. They really didn't, but he was still really mad about it. So John Brown decides to take actions into his own hands. They're like, John Brown, what do you want to do to get back at these pro-slavery people? Yeah, do you want to march on down there and give them a piece of your mind? And he's like, no. How about on May 24th, 1956, in the middle of the night, we all sneak into a pro-slavery settlement on the banks of the Pottawatomie Creek. We pull 5 random guys from their bunks. We cut off both of their hands and stab them in the chest. And that's exactly what they did. See, John Brown was about that action. John Brown was like, oh, you killed 5 of our guys? I'm gonna sneak in the middle of the night, cut the hands off of 5 of your guys and stab them in the chest with broadswords. He didn't kill anyone else. And he didn't just stab them. He picked 5 people specifically to chop off their hands. Like, what? Dude? After John Brown did this, everyone is mad. Everyone in Kansas is pointing fingers at each other. The North is mad at the South, who is mad at John Brown, who is mad at Kansas, who is mad at America. And then their slaves are just mad that they're still slaves. They're like, really, guys? I'm still a slave, okay? People are murdering each other in the streets of Kansas. Like, Kansas was basically hell. Hundreds of people died in Kansas, so many that it was named Bleeding Kansas. Kansas today, corn. Kansas then, blood running through the streets. And there wasn't just fighting in Kansas. See, in Washington, D.C., on May 19th, a senator named Charles Sumner gave a really passionate speech about how much he hated slavery, right? And in his speech, he openly called out and he insulted his colleagues that supported the South. And he really let this old senator from South Carolina named Andrew P. Butler have it. He was talking about how stupid South Carolina was and how stupid Butler was from living in South Carolina and how stupid slavery is. And he also made fun of Butler's speech impediment. Like, Sumner was not holding back. Right before he gave his speech, he was like, "You smell that? That's fried boy." So he gives this little speech, and 2 days later, Butler's nephew, Preston Brooks, hears about it. He walks into the Senate floor. He walks right up to Sumner. He leans over Sumner's desk, and he whispers in his ear, "I have read your speech twice over, carefully. It is liable to South Carolina and to Mr. Butler, who is my relative." After whispering this, Brooks proceeds to, on the Senate floor in Washington, D.C., a place we can go to today, beat Sumner senseless with his cane. Brooks beat Sumner in the head with his cane until the cane broke and couldn't be used anymore. He was like, "That's my relative." Bap, 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 until the cane broke. Sumner suffered from shock and apparent brain damage and did not return to the Senate for 3 whole years. And you would think that people in the South were like, okay, like, I don't want slavery as much as the next guy, but there's no need to, like, beat a guy crazy. Like, come on, like, you're at work. You know, like, it's not all that serious. But no. People from the South applauded his actions so much that they mailed Preston Brooks more canes, a lot of which had "Hit him again" carved into the wood of the cane. So not only did they support this action, but they replaced his broken cane and then told Brooks to just hit him again. People were so passionate about slavery. And the whole time this is going on, Stephen Douglas is like, wow, like, I'm so smart. I'm such a good senator. I made a really great decision. But Stephen Douglas, you did not make a good decision. You made a bad decision. A horrible decision. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was a complete failure. All of the compromises up to this point, the Missouri Compromise, the Wilmot Proviso, and the Compromise of 1850, and now the Kansas-Nebraska Act could not save the North and the South's relationship. The two were destined to break up, and the North knows it. But they know that they can't beat the South unless they have a really strong leader. But that's a story for another day. I'm Mr. Hamstead, and remember, hit 'em again.